Greetings and welcome to everyone joining us live and those watching this playback in the future. I'm Mohamed Younis, Gallup's editor-in-chief and your host for this discussion around understanding American parents' aspirations for their children after high school and the barriers their families face to following their preferred post-secondary path. Faced with unprecedented change on all fronts, America's families are wrestling with questions of college, careers, skills development, and meaningful work. When asked what they most hope their child will do when they graduate high school, parents separated into largely two groups: those who said they want their kids to attend a four-year college, and those who'd prefer their child do something else. Today, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, Gallup, along with important leading voices in education, will shed light on the findings of the research on American parents' aspirations for their children's post-secondary pathways to success. Carnegie Corporation of New York is one of America's oldest grant-making foundations. Established by Andrew Carnegie in 1911, their goal is of promoting the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding. More than a century later, they continue to focus on the issues he considered of paramount importance: international peace, advancement of education and knowledge, and the strength of our democracy. On behalf of Gallup, I want to thank Carnegie Corporation for their partnership and dedication to sharing these data to help educate the public, but also to make sure that we create impact in the real world for families across this country. To kick off this party, yours truly will present some key findings from the report, followed by a discussion on the data with the president of Arizona State University, President Michael Crow. Finally, we'll wrap up with a panel discussion led by Carnegie Vice President and National Program Director for Education, LaVerne Srinivasan, who will be accompanied by Aimée Eubanks Davis, CEO and founder of Braven, and John White, former Louisiana State Superintendent of Education and co-founder and board chair of Propel America. I should mention that these slides and this entire recording will be available for download a few moments after the conclusion of this program. So today, we're really going to focus on a few things that we found in this report. First of all, parents' aspirations for their child following high school, what parents were hoping their kids were going to do after. Barriers that families faced with their children in pursuing their parents' ideal path. And it is important to note that the responses you'll see are based on what the parents perceived as their ideal path for their child. Families' views on how well different post-secondary options prepare children for careers and whether they can access those options. We'll also talk about parents' interest in alternatives to 4- and 2-year college and opportunities to connect learning and work, and what hopefully will lead to a successful career. And finally, we'll look at some implications for children who don't pursue their parents' preferred path after high school and what their future looks like. First, I want to just mention how we gather these data. This is based on a panel study that we used a Gallup panel to do back in December and November of 2020. So the dates of fielding were November 9th to December 8th. We talked to about 3,000 respondents. Some of those respondents had children who are currently in school, and those children are 11 to 25. And other respondents have children who had already finished high school. So we were able to ask them to sort of look back on their experiences. There's a lot more information on the methodology of studying the report itself. And in the resource box on your screen, you'll be able to find a lot more content on how we gathered the data and who it represents. So one of the primary aims of the Family Voices study was to understand parents' aspirations for their children, not just the goals that were within reach. Parents were asked to think about what they would most want their children to do after high school, ignoring any limitations they might face to those pathways. And what we found was that more than half of parents said that if there were no barriers to their child doing what they preferred, they would ideally want their child to pursue a 4-year degree after high school. 46% of parents hope their child would pursue something other than a bachelor's degree. So we're looking for something other than that, let's say traditional golden standard 4-year bachelor's degree education. This includes 8% of those who said they hoped their child would enroll in a 2-year college, and 16% who said they preferred a non-college training program, which included things like trade or vocational training, and technical skills training, apprenticeships, and other programs that sort of combine on-the-job training with classroom-based learning. The rest, the remaining 22%, preferred options outside of the post-secondary education or skills training. This included options such as joining the military, starting a business, or taking a paid job. The study also asked parents whose children were currently enrolled in middle or high school how satisfied they were with 3 common options that we tend to see parents focusing on in post-secondary life for their children in America: a 4-year college, a 2-year college, or training to learn a trade or a technical skill. 84% of these parents said they were satisfied with those options for their child. 16% said they would prefer other options. However, what was interesting is that while these parents were largely satisfied with those 3 options, 45% actually wished there were more options available to their family. We also wanted to understand what types of barriers and obstacles parents face to their ideal pathways. Nearly 2 out of 3 parents reported that at least one barrier to the path they preferred for their child existed in their life or they faced as a family. The most frequently encountered obstacle was related to finances and resources, such as a lack of funding or concerns about student debt after completion of education. While this was the highest among parents who preferred 4-year college, more than 1/3 of parents who preferred 2-year college and non-college training also basically said the same thing. So whether you're a parent that's planning to send your child to the most expensive option or the least expensive option, as we think of them traditionally, cost was a factor and a concern and a barrier from their perspective. While comparatively few parents cited barriers related to a lack of information or availability, it's interesting that the study revealed that these barriers did not apply equally to all pathways. So parents who preferred their child pursue a non-college training program were actually 4 times more likely than those who preferred a 4-year college program to say the program they preferred was not available to them, and nearly twice as likely to say they didn't have information or guidance on how to pursue that other option. These barriers also appeared to have unequal impacts on a child's likelihood, and this was a really important part of what we found with this report. Despite the very common barrier that we all hear about, talk about, and have personally experienced if we've walked this path, which is the financial factor, parents who hoped their child would pursue a college degree or skills training program and whose child did not face any barriers to doing so, 86% of them actually said that their child successfully followed their parents' ideal path. So there's a huge percentage of, if you will, success from the family's perspective if they were able to overcome those barriers. 57%, as I've already mentioned, of parents whose child faced financial barriers to their preferred education or training program said their child was ultimately able to enroll in their path of choice, in a way to say that while financial challenges did decrease the likelihood of the child enrolling in the education or training program that the parent hoped for, nearly 6 in 10 of these families were still able to overcome them. So a lot of perseverance and people overcoming the barriers. But the parents least likely to say their child enrolled in their preferred education or training program were those whose child's pathway was impeded by non-financial barriers, such as a lack of information or availability, and not those traditional financial barriers that we think of. So when you think of the financial barriers, it's experienced by a lot of people, but in terms of the most persistent barriers of keeping people away from their preferred pathway are those non-financial ones around education and information and access to alternative pathways. So non-financial barriers were incurred less frequently, but they appear more difficult for families, in fact, to overcome. In addition to these non-financial barriers, such as access to information about other pathways, In addition to them being the most disruptive to the child, the likelihood to enroll in an education or training program, they also disproportionately impacted Black children or families that were raising Black children. So it's really interesting that in addition to the financial barriers that we all experience, we didn't really see a lot of difference with Black children from the perspective of the parents with the financial barriers, but there were disproportionately likely to be impacted by these other non-financial barriers. Parents of Black children were, in fact, also nearly twice as likely to cite systemic barriers, which include insufficient preparation for their child's school, as well as racism, sexism, or other kinds of discrimination. Meanwhile, they were about as likely as parents of white and Hispanic children to say that their child faced those financial obstacles. So the challenge for at least respondents who are raising Black children tend to be those non-financial barriers that really made them stand out as respondents when compared to others. In addition to understanding more about parents' ideal pathways for their child, the study also sought to gauge parents' interest in non-college options that focus on career learning, even if they didn't prefer these options outright. After reading descriptions of career academies, apprenticeships, internships, and service learning programs, about half of parents said they would be interested in each of these programs for their child. In addition, parents do not seem to see these types of programs as strictly alternatives to college. Even among parents who hope their child would pursue a bachelor's degree, at least 4 in 10 said they would want to see their child involved in these experimental learning pathways. So another really big finding was this huge desire on the part of parents to see opportunities to mix learning in the classroom and real work experience. Part of this interest may be related to the perceptions that parents have, that the parents themselves have of how well experiential learning programs prepare children for successful careers. More parents said that both technical training and apprenticeships provide excellent preparation for children than four-year college. Additionally, although community college often offer degrees that provide training for a specific career path, such as paralegal or dental hygienist programs or many, many others, parents were half as likely to say that community college provided excellent career preparation as they were to say the same about technical training programs and apprenticeships on their own. And that was a really interesting and I think challenging finding for the important role that community colleges play in American education. However, despite having the most positive perceptions of training programs and apprenticeships, parents said they know comparatively little about them. 22% of parents said they know a lot about technical training programs, and just 9% said they know a lot about apprenticeships. Compare this to the 47% of parents who said they know a lot about two-year colleges, or the much higher rate, obviously, who you would expect said they know a lot about four-year educational opportunities. This is notable because the Family Voices study found that parents who said they know more about training programs and apprenticeships had even more favorable perceptions of their preparatory value than parents who knew less. So the more parents knew, the more likely they were actually to feel that those were very useful pathways for their child to achieve success. Despite being framed as a more accessible alternative to four-year college, only 8% of parents said their ideal pathway for their child would be a two-year degree. Twice as many parents said they hoped their child would complete a skills training program, for example. Furthermore, few parents who preferred their child enroll in either a four-year college or a training program said their child instead enrolled in community college. This may be related to parents' relatively low perceptions of the preparatory value of an associate's degree as compared to a bachelor's degree or skills training program. But again, it's important to keep in mind that so much of what happens at community colleges does involve those experiential learning opportunities that perhaps parents may not be aware of are available, which is something we also found as a challenge in the report. Regardless of which education or training pathway a parent prefers, it's important to understand what happens to children who, for whatever reason, are unable to pursue the program their family hoped they would. This is a challenge that faces almost 4 in 10 parents who aspire for their child to pursue some kind of post-secondary education. In these cases, the data suggests that nearly half of these children are not pivoting to another education or training pathway, but are instead entering the workforce directly. So not as an alternative, but essentially as the only other thing they can do. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, adults who do not obtain a post-secondary degree or certification will earn significantly less over the course of their lifetime and are more likely to be unemployed than those who do. And at Gallup, we have years and years of data that show the impact of attaining various levels of education and all kinds of life outcomes. So to wrap up, I just want to talk about some of the implications of the study before I turn to President Crow. Based on parents' stated interest in a variety of programs like apprenticeships, internships, and service learning, many of these children likely enter the workforce not because it was their second option, but as a result of their relative lack of information and availability of an alternative program or option. To give families the best chance to achieve their aspirations for their children, we need to do 3 things based on my reading of the report. One is we need to break down the barriers most likely to derail children from their plans. And as we've learned, a lot of times it's those non-financial barriers that are most likely to derail and keep people away from their desired pathway. We need to build accessible off-ramps for families who are forced to pursue something other than their ideal choice. And we need to integrate key experiential elements into education that'll better prepare all children to succeed in their chosen careers. So with that, I'm really honored to welcome to the program and to the conversation Dr. Michael Crow, who became president of Arizona State University in 2002 and has really since then spearheaded their rapid evolution into one of the world's best public metropolitan research universities. It's been lauded as the #1 most innovative school in the nation by U.S. News and World Report. Those of us who remember and are applying to schools remember that title for 6 straight years. Rated as the most innovative. ASU strives to be a student-centric, technology-enabled university that's focused on global challenge. And under his leadership, ASU has established 25 new transdisciplinary schools. So a man who needs very little introduction and a school that's really led in a lot of the areas we've discussed throughout this program. President Michael Crow, welcome to the conversation, sir.
Hey, Mohamed, how you doing? A very interesting set of results you guys got from the survey and very consistent with a lot of the ways that we're seeing the world manifest itself in real time also.
I'm going to dig into your perspectives on the findings, but first, I want to ask you about your vision and mission at ASU. You've worked hard to really aim that mission to put a premium on access and really student success rather than selectivity for incoming students. Why did you guys want to do that as an institution?
Well, we think that the public university model in the United States in particular has got to be very egalitarian. That is, it has to be as democratically driven as possible. It should set a standard for admission that's related to the actual qualifications as opposed to the number of seats that you can fill or the number of seats that you have to fill. And so we've really launched a 3-way thing almost 20 years ago. Can you build a highly accessible university that is completely representative of the totality of socioeconomic diversity, and we've done that. But can you also have the faculty at that university be as research and creativity active as the faculty at any university or any college that has a much less diverse or smaller student body? And the answer is you can do that also. And then can you build that university to have the deepest impact possible? So we even view now how do we not only, take down all the walls around the university, but take every asset that we have and make it available to any learner in the society more broadly. So not just the students that can come and be with us, but the students who might have to take their degree from home, or the students who have no, they weren't really prepared to go to the university, or they're a high-tech yeoman welder and they really need 2 classes in engineering that we can maybe help them to get. And so what we've decided to do is to lower our shields completely and allow the public purpose of the university to sort of wave over the top of us while at the same time maintaining a research grade faculty. And so that's the thing that we have built, and that's what we're advancing with.
And it's really fascinating. For those of us who aren't familiar, this way, and I wanted to mention when you joined ASU, this way predates COVID. And I remember crossing paths with you at a time where you were explaining the difference between learning that can happen online and learning that's designed to be available to the non-traditional 4-year moving to campus experience. So you guys are truly an organization that's really walk the walk before many. I want to ask you and get your reaction to, of course, cost is huge. We there have been volumes and volumes written and studied about the cost of education as the barrier to education. One of the things we found in this report are those non-financial barriers, like lack of information or access to programs, and knowing as a parent, what are the options for my 18-year-old walking into the world? How do we overcome those challenges? How have you all aimed to overcome those non-cost challenges?
Well, so one thing is it sort of depends, as you said. So if you're a faculty-centric institution, you try to control all variables to the net benefit of the faculty. If you're a student-centric institution with a community impact assessment as your ultimate goal, you rethink everything. So we do see these huge information gaps. And so we've built a number of programs through the years with our technology partners. We have a gamification program that allows you to plot your course from your freshman year of high school based on your interest and what you're interested in through high school and into college and into the university and then on to your career. So we call that Me3. You can take a look at that. We have another program supported by the Eric Schmidt Foundation, Family Foundation, that's building another tool that allows people to easily take care of the FAFSA gap. So you have all these families that if you talk to them about financial aid, it's so complicated, or dad hasn't been working, or the family is split up, or something's going on in the family dynamic, and so there's no way to gain access to the federal financial aid, both grants and loans, and so you've got huge knowledge gaps. And so what we've done is we have gamified everything, reaching out on every front. What we realize is that we're all aware of the voter suppression efforts going on around the United States right now. There's also all kinds of student suppression efforts. Let's just not have good flow of information. Let's make things more difficult. And so all that comes from thinking of higher education as a scarce commodity as opposed to an abundant commodity. And so we've taken on this notion of the model of abundance, and we're using technology as our mechanism to empower abundance. And that means then that, for us, everything has changed, including quality. All quality aspects have gone up. All research activities have gone up. Graduation rates have gone up, diversity has gone up, total graduates have gone up, debt for our students has gone down, numbers of students with debt has gone down. We've been able to constrain our costs, so we've been able to change the way that we work because we're taking this different model.
I'm going to ask you a question that seems maybe kind of obvious, but when you try to think about an answer, for those of us that don't do this, is kind of challenging. So obviously, you really described a paradigm shift in education where the institution is really looking for how to serve the student body and the larger community, as opposed to sort of how to build a bigger and stronger ivory tower, if you will. Yeah. But to really be an institution of excellence that everybody in the world wants to come to, you have to have, obviously, that very high level expertise and experience. And academia and academics has a huge role to play in that. Yeah. As an institution, how do you find the balance between having paths and pathways for academics to really do rigorous research and be a research institution, but at the same time open more doors to more people to do some of the things we've been talking about? How do you find that balance?
Well, we find the balance through finding people dedicated to the broader mission. And so if you don't want to teach a lot, then don't come here. And if you don't want to teach a lot and be involved in research and be involved in heavy creativity, then don't come here. If you don't want to, measure the institutional success against social outcomes, how many people did we graduate? How did they do in the economy? Did we transform K-12? Are we helping to produce more high school graduates? Are we taking all of our assets and making things happen? That chart that's behind you is Tufte's chart on Napoleon's army's march to Moscow. And you can see brown going there and black coming back, and how almost no one comes back. And so think of that as graduates in and graduates out. So that chart shows the typical attrition rate of what occurs in American public colleges, and that it occurs at almost that same level. I mean, so it's 100 units in and 30 units out. It occurs because there's no recognition of what the faculty is that's going to be needed. There's no recognition of the resources that are going to be needed. There's no recognition of the complexity that's going to need to be addressed. And so what we've done is we have found a way to empower our faculty as, you know, we have unbelievable faculty, creative, architecturally, intellectually creative, but deeply committed to our mission. And so I'm a firm believer that public universities in particular have an unbelievably important mission related to the success of the democracy. The private colleges and private universities have narrower missions that contribute to that, but they don't have the same public purpose. So we have to make sure that chart there is as brown when it comes back as it went in.
And it went in, if not greater. And that's
exactly. And academic excellence is the only way to ensure that. And then also, it turns out, even to some of your numbers, I mean, you said 50% of the families thought that a pathway to a 4-year degree was something that was desired. Well, we have no means to produce that in the United States. We're not producing anything like that. We're at half that production level. We've got half the kids that have gone to college in the United States that never graduated. Half of everyone that's alive today that started college never graduated. And so these are huge issues that we've got to solve. So thanks for reminding me of that puppy chart.
No, and thanks for knowing what it is. I talk to a lot of people. I'm so blessed too in my job, and very few people pick up on what that is. It is actually a really cool thing for those of us into education. And it's a really powerful analogy to education itself. It's Joseph Menard's data representation, data visualization of the march into Moscow.
Right.
And interestingly, he never mentioned Napoleon's name, and the whole thing is kind of a statement on how useless war is. But hopefully that's
it wasn't one of Napoleon's better moments, because everything that's reduced there means that someone's dead in that particular
Exactly. It's pretty intense. I want to, we talk a lot about educational equity. And one thing that I love about your own personal story, not just what you're doing in your professional life at ASU, is you're somebody who is a first-generation student. One of the most, I think, discriminatory factors in achieving opportunities of higher education is whether or not your parents have gone to college. Talk to us about your experience and how much that experience has informed the changes you've led at ASU and really had an awareness for what's needed.
Right. So I came from what's called a Section 8 family. So we were eligible for Section 8 public housing support, public food support, USDA food supplements, peanut butter, cheese, all that kind of stuff. Highly disrupted. My mother passed away. We all got split up, all kinds of complexities. And what was interesting in all of that was the way in which, a couple of things, the K-12 system didn't pay attention to people that were disrupted. And it turns out that in huge parts of our society, there's huge disruption for children who are innocent in all of this. I was a bit of a survivor. The brother right behind me didn't finish high school. Never finished high school, and has a completely different outcome. And I'll tell you, he's as smarter than me. He had many abilities that I didn't have, and then he never got the chance to get on track. And so the thing for me that we don't understand is we're leaving so much talent on the ground. The other thing that we've done is we've turned higher education, and your survey sort of shows some of these results. And so we shouldn't care where someone wants to start. Do they want to go to the military? Great, let's help them to be able to do that. Do they want to become a carpenter? Let's help an electrical worker with all the things that are going to be built. Let's get going. Let's make that happen. But the thing that college, junior college, community college, all those things should be equal at the start. What we don't realize is that every one of those people, whether you go to college or whether you go to work right away, are going to need learning now going forward in this phase of our economic evolution throughout the entirety of their life. And we have no information flowing about that. Everyone is advantaged right now through their family circumstance. We have to end that, or we just become a hereditarily based perpetuator of social class. And so we have to have accelerated rates of social mobility. We don't have accelerated rates of social mobility. We can only achieve that with free information flow. I think your survey indicates, I think correctly, it's not the finances for college. If you want to go to college, you can get the money to go to college. We pay for everything for tens of thousands of students. And so that's not the issue. The issue is making the decisions about what path you want to be on, and then realizing from the moment that you make your decision that you're going to need a continual lifelong learning experience, what we call universal learning. And then I got to back up to that. You know, we've got high schools that are grossly underperforming. We've got to help them and help the students that are there to perform so that they can do anything. Let me, your survey doesn't show this, but this will be stark. Only 25% of 18-year-olds are qualified to enter the Army as a private.
Wow.
You have to be a high school graduate. You have to pass the physical fitness test. You have to pass the aptitude test, and you can't have using drugs. And so if you've been using drugs, you can't pass the physical fitness test, you don't have a high school diploma with the right courses that you took in high school, you can't even be a private in the Army. So we have deep problems throughout the entire society, and parents don't have enough information to know this is what it's going to take. If you want to be an electrical worker in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the IBEW, it's not like you're not going to school if you're going to become an electrical worker. You're going to school day one. You're going to be in formal classes, journeyman classes. You're going to be learning as an apprentice taught by journeyman. You're going to be going to class after class after class and certificate after certificate. So the other thing that we're doing to try to help people is we're going to try to put all this stuff together and get people to understand how it all meshes together. So these are your college activities. These are your non-college activities. How do we get them so that they can overlap? And then that person can project all of their capability. And so we need a whole new logic relative to education.
So much of how you've been leading in Arizona is not just about education, but also thinking about how the pathway, hopefully for most families, people don't send their kids through school because they love education. Education is great. But the ultimate objective is to set this person on a path to have a successful career. I think it's even deeper than that. So I have 3 children and 5 grandchildren, and I can tell you that I am, and my wife would agree with this, somewhat obsessed with, I want them to have no limit to their opportunity, and I want them to not have gone through some of the stuff I've gone through, and I want my grandchildren to be able to take advantage of all of that, and that means then building every option and every option and every option and informing them and all kinds of things. And so it's parents want their children to not just be economically successful. You know, they want their children to have a good life. That's what they really want. So as you meet parents and they kind of bring you exactly, you just put it so perfectly, what's your best advice to families in how to make that happen for their kids, no matter what, income level they're at? I mean, it's a challenge really that everyone faces. So you have to make certain that your child gets through high school and is well prepared by the end of high school. Now, they don't have to finish high school in 4 years. Maybe it takes 5 years, whatever family circumstances. Or maybe it takes 3 years. Maybe it takes 2 years. We've become too rigid. And so the first thing I say is you've got to get everybody through high school by whatever means necessary. And then after high school, you need to find the pathway that is the best for your individual child. And what they study at the university is not as important as potentially going to the university. What they do if they go into a profession or get a job is fine, so long as they also learn that they have to continue their learning process. And so what we basically try to argue is for the initiation of what we call a universal learning. So you're going to become a universal learner, and that's really hard because people get through high school and they say, well, we're done, I'm finished with this or whatever. And so what I urge families, that are thinking about college is college basically accelerates your optionality. And it gives you more options over a longer period of your life. And so if you're not sure what you want to do, or you're moving through in different kinds of ways, then you need to build your optionality. Then college is a good pathway for you. If you already know that you've always wanted to be a metal worker, then that's great. Then you should get in that and master that. But you need to be alert to the fact that metalworking may change, and you're going to have to continue to learn, or you won't be able to keep up with where it's going. And so it's the empowerment of the notion of absolute continuous learning. That's President Michael Crow, president of Arizona State University. I cannot thank you enough, sir, for not only joining us today, but for everything you guys are doing down in Arizona. It's hard to this is going to sound like a commercial, but it is hard to find an ASU grad that doesn't love their alum and want to go back some way. So thank you for being with us. All right. Nice to see you, Mohamed. Thanks for the invitation. Next, it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage, to the floor, my friend LaVerne Evans Srinivasan. LaVerne is the Vice President and Director of the corporation's National Program for Education. She oversees grant making and other activities to ensure that America's public schools fulfill their fundamental promise, which is preparing all students to participate fully in our democracy and thrive in an inclusive economy and society. Throughout her long career in educational leadership, LaVerne has been personally dedicated to that mission, including a focus on strengthening college access and expanding post-secondary pathways so young people are supported to succeed in school in their desired career and throughout their lives. LaVerne, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thanks so much, Mohamed. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially thank President Crow for sharing his expertise and reflections. I love the way he positioned this as a design challenge, that if we are going, and the need for a new logic. That's exactly what our thinking is at Carnegie, and this survey has supported and furthered our commitment to thinking about this design challenge in a way that meets the needs of families and students and quite frankly, our country. I'm going to frame a couple, reframe and revisit a couple of the things that Mohamed raised for us when he was going through the data, just to frame the conversation with our two panelists. You know, we commissioned this survey, as we said, to better understand the family's aspirations for their children. And we know that the education system isn't preparing their children for life after high school in the way that they aspire that to happen. The results are sobering, as we've noted, and reveal the disconnect between the opportunities families want for their children and the post-secondary pathways available to them. And President Crow highlighted the number of ways in which ASU, for example, is trying to address those gaps. We also noted that while attending a four-year college remains the gold standard for many families, nearly half of the families, even those who want their children to earn a bachelor's degree, want something different. They want, they're interested in opportunities within the context of either the college experience or otherwise to have access to opportunities for internships, for example, or apprenticeships. The survey also reveals significant barriers, which Mohamed highlighted, around cost. Cost is unsurprisingly still front and center as a barrier, but as President Crow noted, it doesn't need to be a barrier, and it shouldn't be a barrier. And in fact, what we know now from the survey is that what parents find particularly daunting are actually the non-cost barriers associated with accessing post-secondary options. The lack of information and the lack of access to those options, or the awareness that they're available, is actually the greater issue that parents are grappling with in trying to meet the needs and aspirations that they have for their children. Our nation has also had a long-standing focus on making college accessible to all. From an equity perspective, this has been a priority for quite some time. Yet the unintended consequence of leaving has had the unintended consequence of leaving behind students who are either unable or uninterested in pursuing a traditional college path. So what do we need to do? We need to expand and strengthen our post-secondary options and pathways for young people. We need to expose them to the world of work starting in high school. President Crow noted that, you know, we need to do better in high school. And I would also submit that we need to actually expose young people to career learning and opportunities prior to their graduation from high school. We also need to provide better guidance. That's another thing that President Crow underscored already. They need to understand, you know, how to access the options, get the information flowing. Don't let the scarcity of information be a barrier. And we need a seamless education system that supports students through critical transitions from high school to post-secondary learning and to careers. I'm grateful that the survey has given us an opportunity to lift up these gaps that we know are there and to address them going forward. We have the opportunity today, we're fortunate to draw upon that data and the knowledge and experience of people who've been leading the way to do something better for students and families. Today we have with us as a Louisiana State Superintendent, former Louisiana State Superintendent John White, who made career learning a priority for students even before they graduated high school. Now, as the founder and board chair of Propel America, he is bringing educational institutions together with job training organizations, employers, and mentors in an innovative effort to help young people forge a path to a good first job and the post-secondary learning they will need to continue growing in their chosen career. Aimée Eubanks Davis launched Braven to empower promising first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds and students of color with the skills, experiences, and networks they need to land strong, good jobs and build meaningful careers. Their work offers potential models for building a cradle-to-career system that prepares all of our young people for the bright futures they deserve. Let me first turn to John. John, you often speak about how our current education system forces young people into a false choice, either enroll in college and delay income while accruing debt, or find entry-level work and lower long-term chances for social mobility. Can you share your vision for how our K-12 system and our post-secondary system needs to change to be a both-and system that better serves students and families? In addition, we would love to hear about the work you did to strengthen career learning for high school students in Louisiana and why you made it a priority.
Well, LaVerne, thank you. And it's a real honor to be here with Carnegie, with Gallup, certainly with Michael, and with my longtime friend, Aimée. I think it's really a very simple and practical question. And Michael talked about it a lot when he talked about the egalitarian mandate of higher education, which is that we have a country where the overwhelming majority of people of all backgrounds, but in particular, people who are raised in low-income circumstances, do not have bachelor's degrees. And yet we have a high school system and very often a higher education system that is organized around that degree as the kind of singular vehicle to upward mobility, to advancement, to providing for your family. And that just doesn't make a ton of sense when you just think about it practically speaking. I mean, why wouldn't you create other channels rather than the kind of conventional 4 or 5 or 6 year baccalaureate experience as the path to prosperity? And at the same time, I think, and I would venture to guess that Michael's experience and Aimée's experience and probably many of our personal experiences would bear out that a bachelor's degree does remain in our society, for reasons good and bad, a singularly important vehicle to upward mobility, to participation in the growth sectors of our economy and so forth. And so I think we have to think about how do we not surrender on the promise of education of higher education, while still creating more job relevant, faster, less time intensive, less financially intensive vehicles for entering higher education, taking advantage of higher education, and getting a good first job. And I think at its essence, LaVerne, is more diversity of models that are achieving outcomes, first and foremost, has to be rooted in outcomes, wage outcomes, job outcomes, social mobility, economic mobility outcomes, but also that are beginning to play with the conventional sequence of first large upfront investment in education and only then later reap the benefits of high wage employment. In fact, I think we need to start thinking about employment as a vehicle to education as much as education as a vehicle to employment, and to begin to play with, to innovate around what has historically been a very serial relationship where one large investment in education must precede ultimately the benefits in the economy. When we begin to play with that sequence, we see models that effectively are work-study models. We call it a job-first model at Propel, where students do study. They do get higher education immediately following high school, but they also get a credential. That credential allows them a good first job. And that good first job can be the vehicle for stability that they need to further advance their studies toward associated bachelor's degrees. And that's not a radical departure. It's not a departure from the principle of education as a core tenet of upward mobility, but it is thinking about access and stability and taking down the barriers in new ways.
Thank you so much, John. I think it so highlights the issue of design challenge and how we really need to think differently at every level, at the K-12 level and the higher ed level, and how we weave together the experiences at each of those levels with the opportunity for learning and lifelong learning, as President Crow also pointed out. Aimée, our survey shows strong demand for career learning among families who aspire for their children to attend college. Tell us about Braven's model for integrating career learning into the college experience and how that works to address the employment gap experienced by low-income and first-generation students. What should high schools and colleges be doing differently to bring career learning forward as a priority?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me as well. And LaVerne, I would just say, like John mentioned earlier, we've known each other for a long period of time. We both started out in the classroom as teachers. And one of the things that you do as a teacher is you realize that your students continue to grow up. And as they're growing, you start to realize like, oh, wow, this is how things are playing out for them in a way that might be similar to what you thought was going to happen or very different. And that was the experience that I had as I watched my students actually start to go not only into high school, but then into college and really trying to figure out their way into career, was that they really just did not have the opportunity to really practice some of the skills and mindsets and build the network that they really needed to have a strong career over time while still in school. There seemed to be a really false choice being made, which President Crow talked about earlier, that you go to school to learn and learn things like Shakespeare, but not necessarily that you go to college in order to then really think about your pathway out of college over time. And that was really hurting the students who I taught, who were mainly Black, like I am, and from low-income communities, whose families, like mine did, had pretty much bet everything on their success over time being through the doors of post-secondary, and in particular, the bachelor's degree. And so what we did in the world of Braven is really started an innovative partnership, first with San Jose State, now with 3 other schools, where actually the content of getting a young person career ready sits on the academic side, and it's rigorous. Many of our students say this is as hard, if not harder, than other courses and classes that they're taking. And it's fully baked in at San Jose State, Rutgers, Newark, Lehman in New York, and also at National Louis University here, onto the academic side with faculty oversight, et cetera. And the secret in the Braven sauce, though, is that we actually convinced employers to get their talent who needs to also learn how to lead and manage a diverse team, especially in today's America, even before today, in prior America as well, and future America. We're at a point where we are seeing a more diverse group of people coming into the workforce, and it is important for our managers and our leaders over time to know how to lead and manage a diverse team. And so they actually provide us with folks who can coach teams of 5 to 8 students through the Braven experience, who not only help to shrink a large classroom down from 200 or 300 or 500 to 5 to 8 and deliver content, but also for our students, they really get an opportunity to network and get to know a person who is in the professional world, who they then know and can network with and build into their network. Because for many of our students, what we realize is that they just do not know anyone in the professional workforce, and that really puts them at a significant disadvantage when it's time to get internships, when it's time to get jobs. Basically, those often go to people's networks of friends and family members. And so that's how we are engaging in our work. And I would say on the high school side, again, we sit in the college side, the intentionality just has to be there. And I just think there shouldn't be this false choice between academic and academic rigor, as well as making sure that young people are not only prepared for the workforce, but honestly have a network that can help guide them into that next step.
Thanks so much, Aimée. Those are incredible insights, and the work that you all are doing at Braven is so critical and so important in terms of the innovation needed to address the design challenge that we're talking about. I also realize that as we've been thinking about this and the way a lot of people orient to it, as Mohamed pointed out in the data, is that community colleges are meant to be an essential part of the solution for addressing the need to bind together academic learning and skills learning to prepare for specific careers and good jobs. John, community colleges are an important part of the Propel America model, but only 20% of families in our survey indicated that community colleges provide excellent career preparation. Do we need to rethink the role of community colleges in light of the infrastructure challenges that we're facing or have been facing and that have been exacerbated now in the context of COVID? How does this influence or inform the desire to think differently about workforce development?
Yeah, I think this is really a critical point, and I think that it's a hard one. It's a really, really hard one because this administration, I think the Obama administration, have been right, even in the nascent days of this administration, to highlight the critical role of community colleges. And now we have a first lady who is herself a. And at the same time, the numbers you described are very, very humbling within the survey. Even when stacked against other educational options, I mean, not even coming close to the level of faith that people have in them. And I think that this gets at a point that Aimée touched on, which is that community colleges, they're really not a thing. They're multiple things. They're at least two things. They are ostensibly academic preparation for those who are going to transfer into four-year environments. And they are, secondly, workforce environments for those who are going to go right into the workplace. And right there at the existential core of community colleges, you have the false choice fully embedded and embodied. And the ugly reality of it is, and this is no one's fault, it's just been built into the institutional fabric of those organizations, is that divide is the institutionalization of the very choice that we are all coming here today to decry that we force kids to make. Meaning you don't get college credit very much in community colleges when you go to get the type of workplace-based experience that we've been talking about throughout this session. But on the other hand, you typically don't get the kind of job relevance that you may need to get a good first job, earlier than, say, 3 or 4 years down the road if you're just pursuing the academic side of the house. And of course, that comes with all other kinds of barriers, with Pell Grants and other sorts of Title IV aid not available to those who are pursuing the workplace-based side of the house, but the career connections that Braven has done so brilliantly at making not available to those who are on the academic side of the house. This has to change. This is a design challenge. And so I think on some level, this is about there being a generation of Michael Crows running the community colleges of America, meaning showing us new paths forward, because these things are just as much kind of organizational culture and habit as they are really functions of the laws and regulations of our country. But also it does mean we need higher education reform in America. The day is essentially wrapped up in higher education reform. And the power that the federal government has is the power to, A, define success for institutions, and B, to define how institutions are supported financially. And I would say that in neither case have we gotten it right. In both cases, we have effectively enshrined the old school mentality of academics on one side, workforce on the other. And if we want to see change, we need more entrepreneurs like Michael Crow, great college leaders, but we're also going to need a better regulatory and funding regime out of Washington and out of the state capitals of this country.
Thank you, John. That was a very informative answer. I think it's an interesting challenge that we're dealing with right now. And there are so many obstacles that people are focused on, the barriers, but we have a lot to learn from. We have a lot of experience in the innovations that are being pursued in various organizations, either by President Crow or in your organization or Aimée's, to learn from. And we need to listen. I mean, one of the interesting things about this is the voices of these families and these parents is very practical. They know what they want and need for their children, and it aligns beautifully with what we as a country need in order to progress. So thank you for those insights. I want to think a little bit, Aimée, with you about the first generation and low-income students and the extent to which they struggle to complete college because they're balancing multiple responsibilities, including paid work outside of school. So how can we reimagine how this works such that the desire and the opportunity to have a work experience while in college doesn't compete with meeting graduation requirements, but instead furthers progress to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And so sorry if my camera is not working. So hopefully it is this go round, but I'm not sure. So that said, LaVerne, I mean, bottom line, the students who we work with in the world of Braven are often going to school full time, and they're often going to work full time. And in some cases, they're going to work 2 jobs. People haven't given enough thought to, again, the reimagining of and the evolution of higher ed. And I would also include in that higher education work study programs. So I was on work study. I did the dishes. I worked in the library. And nowadays, it really is so important when young people are trying to have a pathway from higher ed or post-secondary into the workforce for them to be able to spend some time in a really robust, and I would argue for the group of students who we work with, paid internship in order to get on the job, not only experiences, but I brought this up earlier, and I know one of our listeners is curious about building social capital through companies, but actually being able to get into workplaces where they can start building a network of people who are professionals or in the professional world that they want to be in. And so what I've just realized is that, and the study absolutely, showcased this in terms of Black students, parents feeling like there are additional systemic barriers. Like, I would love to even know more about which one. I mean, there's so many that Black students face. But one of the ones that I would actually say is that students are having to spend so much time working jobs that are important for them to have in order to pay for school, in order to pay for rent, in order to help their family units. But those jobs often are not jobs that are going to help them get into a strong first job in the professional workforce. And so one of the things that I really would love for us to see happen is for there to be a reimagining of work study where students could actually do work study roles in private spaces, in nonprofits, which I know is possible already, of course, on the campuses, but jobs that are far more intentional around building real skills that are applicable for the job that a young person is trying to get over time. So as much as I loved washing the dishes in college, that wasn't necessarily a way for me to build some additional skills in a workplace where my family just had never been. Because then I was put at such a disadvantage, and that's what we're seeing of our schools. They're put at such a disadvantage in terms of just not having that quote unquote aunt or uncle who can tap them into the elite quote unquote internship or over time that really strong job. And so I really keep coming back to how important I believe that it is on the academic side of high school, of community college, of certificate programs, training programs, and then also the BA to actually really blend in high quality experiences in order to make sure that students, especially those who have to go to school and have to go to work, have a fair shot at getting into the kind of pathway that they want to get into in terms of the labor market through school, not trying to do it on top of a full-time job or 2 full-time jobs or 2 part-time jobs and a full course load, and then trying, and I'm not sure at what point in time to then get an internship, especially one that's unpaid. They just can't make that happen. And it ends up impacting their economic outlook forever. So most students who are graduating this country, even with a bachelor's degree, who are African-American or Black or brown, are earning 66 cents on the dollar to their higher income peer with the exact same degree. And I think it absolutely starts because of the systemic barriers that exist in higher education.
Thank you, Aimée. And yes, we could see you this time, so that's wonderful. I know we're almost out of time, and there are still so many questions that I'd love to be able to discuss with both of you. You have such tremendous experience and background, and you are the innovators, as is President Crow. I just think we can I want to wrap this up by focusing on a couple of things. It is imperative that we take seriously this challenge. Families are taking it seriously. We're listening to them. We need to act as a public that needs an education system, a workforce system that is better braided together, that listens to and understands the needs of families, and that is set up as something that presents itself not as a false choice between academic learning and rigor and the opportunity for preparation for a good first job, but intentionally considers how we braid those experiences together to actually present the kind of outcomes and opportunity. And as Michael Crow put it, and I think he put it well, that it's not just access to opportunity for social mobility's sake, it's also for the access to being able to have options and a good life. So thank you all today for joining us. We look forward to hearing more of your questions and the opportunity to continue this conversation with others as we go forward in this work. Thanks again.